Section 2.2 is analyzing the graphs of functions. So here we have a relationship graph down here and we have a bunch of questions about it. So go ahead and pause the video and go through and answer all of these questions. So first one asks if it is in fact a function. It passes the vertical line test. Every x-coordinate only has one y-coordinate. Because there's a hole right here, it's defined here, but there's a hole here, so this still passes the vertical line test. So that's a yes. F of -1, x equals -1 is right here. Its y-coordinate is a +1. F of 0, x equals 0, y equals 0. F of 2, at x equals 2, you looked at the defined one, so y equals 4. Not this one, that's a hole, so it doesn't count, it's only the defined one. Is f of -4 positive or negative? F of -4 is down here, so it's going to be a negative number. For what values of x is f of x positive? Well, for f of x to be positive, that means your y-coordinates are positive, which means you're going to be above the y-axis. So we hit the above the x-axis. We hit the x-axis at x equals -2, and then it's above almost everywhere else. It is strictly greater than, so it can't equal 0, and at x equals 0, it's equal to 0. So I wrote this in interval notation. Parentheses means you don't include it. So I'm starting at -2, don't include it because it's equal to 0, and I go up to 0, don't include it because its y-coordinate is 0. Union is like your or. 0, parenthesis means don't include it because it's equal to 0, all the way up to infinity. From here on out, it's positive. Domain, I'm going to assume this goes to -6. So I started at -6. All these x-coordinates are taken, all these x-coordinates are taken, all these x-coordinates are taken. There's an arrow here, so I'm going all the way up to infinity. I include -6 with this bracket. That's what the bracket means. It's your or equal to, because it's part of the domain. Range, down here I started at -4, again including because I actually reached that value. I reach everything, I reach everything, I reach everything up to a +4. Again, a bracket because I actually achieved that value. X-intercepts where you cross the x-axis, so -2 and 0. Y-intercepts where you cross the y-axis. For a function, there can only ever be 1 for it to pass the vertical line test, or 0. And in this case, it's y equals 0. So now we're given a graph of a function, and we want to answer the following questions. So go ahead and pause the video and answer these questions. So for the first one, they want to know if this point 1/3 is on the graph. So I just plugged in 1 for x, and you end up with 3/5. So yes, it is in fact on the graph. The next one, if x equals 0, what's f of x? So I just did f of 0, replace every x with a 0, you end up with 2/4 or 1/2, so the point is 0, 1/2. If f of x equals 1/2, what is x? So you're going the opposite direction. So I replaced f of x with 1/2 and then cross multiplied. You end up, once you simplify, with 2x squared minus x equals 0. So if you factor out an x, you end up with x equals 0 or x equals 1/2. We'll review this when we get to quadratics a little bit more also. So you get 0, 1/2 and also 1/2, 1/2. And this is fine for a function. Two different x-coordinates can have the same y-coordinate, just not the other way around. What is the domain of f? So it's a rational function, which means the denominator cannot equal 0. So I set the denominator not equal to 0, so I get x such that x is not equal to -4. What are the x-intercepts, if any? So if x-intercepts, that means y equals 0, so I set the whole thing equal to 0. For a rational function to equal 0, for a fraction to equal 0, that means the numerator has to be equal to 0 because 0 divided by anything is 0. So you end up with x squared plus 2 is equal to 0, which means x squared is equal to -2, which is not possible in the real plane. So for this, it's just an answer of none. We're only talking about real numbers right now. The last one, what are your y-intercepts? Y-intercepts occur when x equals 0. Well, we already did that one in part B, so y equals 1/2. When x equals 0, y equals 1/2.